What's up, Flick Connection? This is Darren, here to help you get more out of movies, and today we're going to go over 20 of the best cyberpunk movies out there. Now, if you watch Altered Carbon on Netflix recently, whether or not you liked it, if you liked the setting, that is a cyberpunk setting. Now, what is cyberpunk? It's essentially a science fiction subgenre that combines high-tech and low life. And you saw that in Altered Carbon. You've seen it in other movies where there's highly advanced technology like artificial intelligence, and then there's just low level, street level, kind of a grunge factor that has to do with like a disruption in social order. They tend to focus a little bit on maybe drug culture, sexual revolution, things like that. It essentially was birthed out of science fiction novels that then movies were based on. And in 1984, William Gibson released his debut novel, Neuromancer. Now, I highly recommend this book. I never read books, and I've read this one. If you're into the whole cyberpunk thing, this is not necessarily where it came from, but this novel solidified cyberpunk as a genre. Now, it came out 2 years after probably the godfather of cyberpunk movies, which is Blade Runner. And we're going to talk about Blade Runner first because it is one of the best of all time. If you didn't get Blade Runner, there are lighter cyberpunk movies that you can get into, and as you develop a taste for it, you may have more luck watching Blade Runner and understanding some of what's going on. So the original Blade Runner, 1982, Harrison Ford, directed by Ridley Scott, highly recommend it. If somehow you missed all of that and you're only just now getting introduced to cyberpunk through Altered Carbon, don't watch Blade Runner first. A lot of people make that mistake. They watch it and it turns them off. It's a heavy movie. It doesn't follow a typical formula. It's easy for it to lose you, and you maybe need a primer, so we'll talk about some others. But the original Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049, which I think is easily the best movie of 2017 and will live on for decades as a classic movie, those two work well together. They're the top of the heap, but let's talk about some as we go that are maybe a little more accessible, and then maybe a couple that are somehow even less accessible. By the way, if you like this shirt, this Paul Thomas Anderson filmography shirt, you can get it as well as some other designs I currently have out at teespring.com. I'll put a link in the description below. Now, for something a little newer, like again, if you liked Altered Carbon and you want to get into it, I would recommend DREDD, which came out several years ago. It was actually written by Alex Garland, who also wrote and directed Ex Machina, Annihilation, which is out in theaters now. I just did a video on it. You can check it out on the channel as well. Great sci-fi writer. DREDD, a lot of people overlooked it because there was sort of a cheesy Stallone version that came out years ago. This one's nothing like it. It's a really cool, really well done action movie. It did appear to rip off the Raid a little bit, which is actually not true because they were actually, filmed and released at almost the exact same time. It's a big coincidence, but nonetheless, a great little cyberpunk movie. It takes place in sort of it takes place in one building basically. Very cool. It's a good stepping stone to get you a little further down the cyberpunk rabbit hole. Mute on Netflix. I did not love this movie. It's a Netflix original. I felt like it was poorly written. I felt like the characters, their dialogue didn't make sense. And I don't mean like the story didn't make sense. I felt like the story was kind of shallow and that the characters' interactions were just kind of odd and clunky. That said, if you really love the genre and you really just loved Altered Carbon, Mute is another good place to start. As a movie, I don't think it's great, but some of the set pieces and just the environment are cool. And then Paul Rudd, really, I think one of his best performances ever. I think he was great in it. Watch it for that reason. Just don't have high expectations for it, and you will probably enjoy it more than I did. An oldie but a goodie is Total Recall with Schwarzenegger. This is just a classic sci-fi movie, and it's technically cyberpunk. You've got just high-tech, high-advanced technology where people can kind of go on these digital vacations, and there's sort of the high life, and then he finds his way down into the underbelly underneath the surface of Mars. Yes, Mars. It's cool, it's exciting, it doesn't quite go where you think it's going to go the first time you watch it. It's an oldie now, but like I said, it's good. It's got some cutting edge special effects moments in it, and just fun to watch. This is Schwarzenegger almost at his best. Not that this movie is his best, but this is that 10-year gap where he was just killing it. This one's right in the middle there. Thumbs up. Again, it's a good way to hop into cyberpunk, even though it's not the best example of the genre. A lot of people don't think about this, but the Matrix trilogy is cyberpunk. Now, the reason it's not thought of as much is because it really has its own style with the black leather and pleather and the sunglasses and the whole thing. But by definition, it fits into cyberpunk, and it really borrows from books like Neuromancer, but it's its own unique thing. It combines kung fu and anime, and it's got such a unique mix mash of stuff that, the original is really, really great. I think they reached for the brass ring maybe a little bit too much on the sequels. I like the story that they wrote, but it just didn't deliver the punch that I think it maybe was intended to deliver. That said, great movies. It is cyberpunk, even if it's not the most rich and vibrant example. Another Keanu Reeves movie that has since been forgotten about, Johnny Mnemonic. Cool little sci-fi flick from the 90s. I feel like it's been forgotten about. When I was a teenager, this was on cable TV all the time, so all of us were watching it every couple of weeks. Someone new had watched it. It's a cool movie. If you somehow just never saw it, definitely go try to find it. I'm not sure where you could find it right now. I've never seen it on streaming services, but I bet you could get it on Blu-ray on Amazon for cheap. Now, not a great movie, but a great example of cyberpunk is Ghost in the Shell from last year with Scarlett Johansson. A lot of people hated on this movie because they were such good fans of the anime. If you don't feel like you were ready to jump into anime, this movie could be a stepping stone. Now, it is not as good as the original anime, and I am not an anime guy, but I love the original Ghost in the Shell. I was very let down by the live action movie, but production design-wise, this movie is beautiful. It's a beautiful cyberpunk movie just for the design alone. The action's good, the story's okay. If you're looking to jump from something like Altered Carbon and you want to get down into cyberpunk, this is another good first, second, maybe even third stepping stone. And if you're really getting into it and you feel like it's not giving you enough, then you might be ready to start jumping into something like Blade Runner. Speaking of Blade Runner, let's talk about one on the list that is way out there, that's way harder to sort of recommend and watch, and that's TETSUO, the Iron Man. Now, this is not about Tony Stark. This is not a Marvel movie. This is a wild, wild, black and white Japanese flick with just bizarre, crazy visuals, and it's about a man that's sort of turning into a machine. It is wild, and it's essentially like an acid trip. It technically is cyberpunk. It's not going to fall, because it's black and white and everything, it's not really going to be as beautiful as some of the others, but I'm almost wondering why I put this one on the list. But if Blade Runner's not enough for you and you want to find the bottom of the cyberpunk rabbit hole, check this one out. There's another one. I think it's called TETSUO, the Bullet Man. It's filmed in color. It's sort of like a remake by the same director that was done years later. It's crazy too. So if you loved the first one, check that one out too. I know that one was on Hulu at one point, so it might still be. EXISTENZ is a really weird little movie that really stuck with me. It's got its own thing going on. This is a David Cronenberg movie, if that sounds familiar. Rick and Morty reference Cronenberg's work a lot. They even have like a Cronenberg verse where all the creatures are weird with eyeballs and weird bodies and stuff, because Cronenberg has these weird creatures and body dysmorphia going on in his earlier work. This is one of them. Naked Lunch is one you've probably heard of at least. EXISTENZ really sort of like faded off into obscurity, but it's got Jude Law in it and Jennifer Jason Leigh, and it's essentially about this cutting edge virtual reality technology that feels real, which sounds very familiar, but this one's odd. It like requires like a port on your back to get jacked into, that instead of like the Matrix where it looks like a plug, it actually looks like a little asshole. It like articulates, and it's weird and it's gross, and it's just really, really interesting. Like, I couldn't stop thinking about just how weird and bizarre this movie is. If you've never seen it, watch it. You can rent it for cheap. You can buy it for cheap. You're going to be surprised. You're going to go, how did I not know about this super bizarre Jude Law movie? It's just weird. I don't want to give anything else away. Watch it if you're not easily grossed out. ROBOCOP, it's one everybody's seen, but it's a great example. It's not as... It's almost like the beginning of cyberpunk. It's almost like the first step towards like a cyberpunk dystopian future, because it's not that far away from like where we are right now. So it's a good one as well, but it's not going to scratch that cyberpunk itch that you might be having after watching something like Altered Carbon. One that might scratch it is an anime, possibly the godfather of anime movies. Rip me apart in the comments below, you anime guys, but AKIRA is one of the most famous animes of all time, and if you're not into anime, this is one that you can watch. This is an accessible one that almost anybody can watch. It's a great action movie. Leonardo DiCaprio has actually been trying to get a live action version made for a long time. He's a big fan of this movie, and if he doesn't own the rights outright, he owns part of the rights to a movie and has just been trying to get it backed and produced, and he's always off doing other things like banging chicks on yachts outside of the Cannes Film Festival, but that's neither here nor there. Looper's a great recent one. Say what you will about Rian Johnson if you hated what he did to Star Wars. Looper's a sick little film. Again, just like RoboCop, it's kind of the first step forward into a cyberpunk universe. The elements are there, but we're not full-blown cyberpunk like we are with Blade Runner. Want to talk about full-blown cyberpunk? The fifth element is just cyberpunk, full throttle, not holding back, going for it. This is one of those weird movies a lot of people didn't like when it came out, but just it found its audience and it has maintained like this fan base over a long period of time. And it's good. It's super weird. It's fun. If you love The Fifth Element and you somehow overlooked Valerian in the City of a Thousand Planets from last year, you need to go watch it. It's not as good, but it's almost like a spiritual sequel to The Fifth Element. Same creators. So those are two good recommendations there if you're getting into that sort of vibe and you really want to go full cyberpunk. Strange Days is a light one. It doesn't go full cyberpunk. In fact, it's probably the lightest one you can go with. It's basically a near future where there's virtual reality that you could, just like EXISTENZ, but it's not gross at all. It's got a great cast. It's cool. It's got some cool point of view shots. And this was actually even directed by Academy Award winning director Catherine Bigelow, who was, I believe, still married to James Cameron at the time that this one came out. It's a cool sci-fi flick. It was one of those $5 bin movies at Walmart when I was in college, so everyone saw it then. If it somehow kind of eluded you today, go check it out. It's a good movie. And then for the dark side of cyberpunk, I want to start with 12 Monkeys. Really cool Terry Gilliam film. It focuses way more on the low life end of cyberpunk. It's the future. There's advanced technology, but it's grungy, it's dirty. It involves time travel where there's a horrific event and we're trying to stop it. There's a good series it's based on as well. This is one most people have seen, but still, it is cyberpunk. It's cool. It's one of the grittier ones, which I kind of almost like that aesthetic almost more than the Blade Runner aesthetic with the neon and everything. Almost like the more put together, everything's dirty kind of aesthetic that you get from that. You also get that aesthetic from the City of Lost Children, which goes even deeper and darker down the hole. It's a little further in the future, and it's grim. It's dark. Tim Burton has to be inspired by this movie, and I think it's better than a lot of his work, and because it's foreign language, a lot of people probably haven't seen it, but if you like this fork of the cyberpunk rabbit hole, definitely watch The City of Lost Children. Another one that just goes real dark that's almost not cyberpunk, but I might as well squeeze it on the list here at the last minute, and that's Dark City. I don't want to give too much away with this one, but it's cool. If you love The Matrix, if you loved some of the darker ones I've recommended here, Dark City's one you gotta watch. The first time I saw this one, I couldn't believe I hadn't seen it before. watch it. I don't want to, the less you know about this movie, the better. But man, it's got a cool noir thing going on. You don't know what's happening the whole time. It's just really engaging. It's not super long, so they cram a lot into, you know, kind of maybe a 100-minute story, and it just really goes from beginning to end. So check it out. I love that one. I really love everything I've recommended on this list. Hopefully you found some good movie recommendations and you can expand your cyberpunk horizons. If you've got additional cyberpunk recommendations, let everyone know in the comments below. I will keep making these videos as long as you keep watching them. But thanks for watching this one, and you will see me next time.